Thanks, Don, and good morning, everybody. Stuart here, and Lewis will be joining me as well. Hi there. Thanks for spending the time to join us this morning. So basically what we wanted to do is we've implemented at Kineo an awful lot of portals, learning management systems, extended enterprise systems, which we'll come on to, and the like over the years. And what we really wanted to share was, I suppose, 10 tips or key pieces of advice that we've consolidated from our experience in terms of what we think really helps when it comes to loving your LMS and really getting the most out of it. So you might be in the position of having an existing LMS, or you might be considering replacing one or buying one from scratch, or have some other portal needs. These are all things which hopefully will help you out when you're going through that exercise. So starting off with a question, do your learners, being the primary audience or the largest audience for your learning platform, love your LMS? They really love it. So let's fire a question to you guys to start off with. How is your own LMS relationship going? And we've got a poll here which Don's flagged up, and you can choose one of these options. So have you got an LMS and you love it? Have you got one and you don't love it? Don't you have one at all? Or have you recently broken up with one and are on the rebound? I'll just give you a minute just to fire in a few responses.
And I think we agreed, didn't we, that we're going to ask people to share. You know, when you're talking about your relationship, it's quite important. You don't want to have a bald question like this. We want to share. Why did you choose that particular answer, whatever it was? So if you love your LMS, please share why. Or if you've hated it and you've broken up with it, please let us know what's going on in the relationship. So please let us know in the text chat area, why are you in this current position with your LMS? What's driving you to provide that answer? We've got a few answers still checking in, but I think I'm going to end that poll so we can see what the results are. Lots of thoughts coming through now. And we're going to continue this theme of love all the way through.
Thanks, Don. So hopefully this is some good therapy from some of you out there. Obviously, we get some quite high numbers on people who don't love their system.
I have clicked the broadcast results box, so we should see that the vast majority of people, 66%, are saying they have one, they don't love it. I am delighted to see that almost 20% of people are saying that they have one and they love it, which is far more than I would have expected. I think that's rather good news. Guys, are you seeing anything that surprises you in these questions, in the responses we're getting? And Maria, I think it's fairly typical, full of information, but no real structure, difficult to find things, and people give up. Is one. Alison sort of echoes that, drowning in information. Jane says, clunky to use, it's hard to find stuff. And you know, this idea of things being clunky, difficult to use, and it being effectively drowning, there being too much stuff, seems to be fairly common as a theme here.
It's something, we hear a lot about from our customers, is that they've had a poor experience, with either with their existing or with the previous system, whereby the usability is not great, and it just makes it, just a kind of a slow, kind of painful experience. And that's something, obviously, that we as an industry need to make sure we address in terms of the design, and that's something we'll be covering when we talk about this today.
You don't want a slow, painful experience if you're in love, do you? You want it to be free-flowing and lovely, and that's what Michelle's got. She says she totally loves her LMS because it's socially collaborative and allows blended. Final word probably to Jen Wick, not intuitive, especially for learners. Sounds to me like, Jen, maybe the LMS is designed for people other than learners, and I think that's something that Stuart and Lewis will pick up on. Guys, back over to you.
Okay, thanks. So what we're going to move on to now is a bit of therapy to go with all that. So thanks for sharing your thoughts as to where you're currently at. So let's move on. So we've identified these 10 pet hates. So number one is, I know looks aren't everything, but they are something. So this.
Sorry, I'm laughing. I love this one. Sorry, I'm going to put myself back on mute. Go ahead.
So from our perspective, and I think from the sector of the clients that we work with, is that looks matter, and it's not. Of course, we've got to have great functionality, and we've got to be able to deliver what the LMS needs to functionally do and deliver into the business. But actually, what it looks like is also really important. So within that, really, we consider things like what we don't want is something that feels like a big system, feels like a database or some technical system. And I remember when I was an e-learning designer many years ago, the first time I saw an LMS, I was quite shocked because we'd been designing with great content. But when actually I saw the LMS it was going on, I thought, oh Christ, people have got to go through this quite nasty interface to get through half a dozen clicks before they even reach the thing that we've designed for them. So branding's important, and making that look and feel really work for people is key. Some of the ways we can do that is by making sure that we approach it as a branding exercise as well as a sort of system exercise. So we can involve branding people, graphic designers, end users to see what floats their boat, make sure it goes beyond just the brand but actually represents a whole experience, which we'll come on to in a minute as well. So there's some key points around there. What we wanted to show is just a few examples of what it can be like. It doesn't have to be a horrible thing. So we're just going to flash a few up here. This is a portal we designed for EasyJet, which is living on our Totara learning management system, which is an open source system. So we've got a quite clean interface here. This is the home page. We can access what we need to. Obviously it's EasyJet branded. You'll recognise the branding and colours in here. Sometimes clients have different internal branding to external, but in this case EasyJet have similar. Moving on, here's an example from MindEd. I don't know if you want to quickly mention that one, Lewis.
Yeah, well, I wanted to chip in as well and say that, what we're talking about here really is first impressions. So, the first time your learner accesses the system before they've even gone anywhere near any learning, it's kind of what does that immediately feel like? And it's so important to kind of get a quick win there by having a good first impression. So the visual design really, well, firstly reflecting your brand, so you have a good brand experience for your internal customers effectively. But also just in terms of them thinking, well, this is, this feels good, so I actually want to progress with this and kind of go in and access the learning. So with the visual design aspect, we're really talking about that first instant when the user accesses the system. The MindEd site that we've got loaded on the screen right now is going to be it launches in a few days' time actually, is a public-facing learning system. So it's important whether it's an internal or an external audience, but of course it's particularly important where you've got an external audience where you're effectively putting your brand out there to the public. So we've got a very strong visual design that reflects what the organisation is doing. And as some of the posts have stated in the chat box, not kind of overloading the interface. So these are the sort of design considerations we have when we're doing that visual design, when our art director is working with your branding team to come up with the look and feel of the LMS.
Cool. And one last one we'll just quickly flash up is this is a data flux. This was publicly facing, and this one takes a bit of a zoom out because actually this was a scrolling screen. So all of these little strips actually were designed to sit above the folds. So as you click down, you move between these different sections of the site. So it's quite a nice visual design we had there as well. Okay, let's move on to number 2, pet hate. I just can't figure you out. You're a mystery wrapped up in a bad design inside a pop-up window. So the point we're trying to get across here is that sometimes, unfortunately, LMSs are very much designed with a technical head-on. They're designed from the perspective of the administrator, not the end user. Now, the administrator, of course, is part of our audience group and an important person. But our end users, our learners, represent the vast majority of people using the system for what it's intended to do, which is to deliver their training and learning plans and the like, or indeed act as a social platform, as someone mentioned in the chat room. So the point here is one about user experience, UX, and what we want to get across is considering the journey of everybody that's involved, learner, administrator, course creator or content creator, manager, and other roles that sit in this system, so that when you're designing your learning management system or working with an organisation such as ourselves to do so, that we should represent each of those. And Lewis, as a user experience expert, I'll hand over to you to share some thoughts.
Well, exactly right, Stu. It's really considering all the users of the system. So, of course, the end user is the most critical user experience we're looking for. We're willing in terms of the back end for it being not quite as smooth an experience as the front end, but then nevertheless, we do need to think through that user journey. We use the term use cases in the web industry. So it's looking at the individual users, how they're going to interact with the system, what their requirements are. So we talk about actors within those user cases. You have an actor that's an end user that's accessing some learning. You have an actor that's the LMS administrator. How are they going to access the system? What's their journey? And really kind of factoring all of this in when we're designing the system. Of course, the vast majority of times we're working with a structured system, whether it be proprietary, open source or whatever. So we're working within a certain structure, but nevertheless, we can still really look to see how we can optimize that experience. Where possible, we would always involve users. So talk to the people that are actually going to be using the system and involving them in the design stage. So kind of validating the designs as we go through it. Related to the use cases I talked about, we can also create mini personas, which is creating some kind of archetypes, some users of the system and giving them attributes, giving them names, assigning them a picture, so we can really get inside their heads when we're designing the system and thinking, well, what would it be like for Fred? What would it be like for Susan? Really kind of putting ourselves out, design selves inside the end users' eyes and minds. So yeah, it's all about the usability of the system and designing for the user. Back in the day, for websites, they were owned by IT departments, and a few years back we had some pretty kind of techie-looking sites that weren't a great user experience. The industry's moved on, and we're a web technology-based industry. Users are accessing the learning and accessing the LMS through a browser. So it's really important that we kind of take the best of what web is doing in the web design world and apply that to the learning environments.
And a nice point Andy W just raised there is actually, can you hide the LMS entirely? And actually through Tincan now actually that's becoming possible. So actually it's possible to point people direct at content, and for that to be registered back through to the LMS behind the scenes as well. So actually you can actually avoid seeing an LMS, but the LMS also still forms a function in its own right in terms of learning plans and social learning and other reporting and all sorts of other things. So we still need to consider it in that respect. Just to flash up a couple of examples here. This is a platform we have at City and Guilds Kineo, which delivers apprenticeships and content and youth journeys online. And as an example here is we've taken the traditional learning plan and delivered this as a scrolling timeline to make it more intuitive and make it feel like more you're moving along a pathway than just looking down a list of stuff on the screen. And some other key features in here which are nice for learners is that we can see our progress. To date, we've got a big pie chart which is showing full there, which becomes completed as we complete pieces of training. And also for learners, when they get into the course pages in the LMS, they have nice structured learning plans here where we're working through different tasks which we give timings on, and we can see how far through we are, and we can see if we have to do these things or not. But also from the manager's perspective, here's a screen that a manager might see where they can see for learners they're overseeing notifications about what they're up to, or they can access their learning plans or see how far through things they are. So they've got tools which are nice and easy to use too. And similarly from the administrator's point of view, then our system, in this case based on Totara, the administration interface is designed to be easy to use as well. In this case we can see here, well, it's maybe not super clear from the screenshot, but there's nice simple tools here to construct custom reports so that we can choose what we want to report on and who we make those reports available to in a nice intuitive interface. Number 3, I never know where I am with you. There's weird stuff below the surface. What sometimes happens here, this is also sort of still keeping in the tune of the look and feel and user experience, and we'll move on to some other areas after this. What we wanted to get across is sometimes what you see is a really nice front end to the learning management system, but once you get past that into other screens, into course pages or e-learning content or other resources like PDFs or PowerPoints or whatever else you might live in your system, that isn't followed through, and actually some of those things don't look so good, and what you can end up with is a bit of a Frankenstein's monster where it's all been a bit bolted together over time. There's never been perhaps an overall vision, or that vision's got lost over time. So actually it doesn't have to be that way. We of course utterly appreciate you're not going to get everything off one supplier necessarily, and therefore it may be difficult to ultimately achieve this, but to have a vision of what the overall experience needs to look like, not just from the learning platform's perspective, but also from all those other assets and content that lives or is linked from the system, can really help create a great user experience.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I mean, it's I suppose just being joined up really in terms of thinking about the visual design, the user experience, the content that we put onto the platform, and not only in terms of the learning, but in terms of those associated assets. So not all organisations have a kind of a brand ID manual, but nevertheless we can still think about that concept when we're designing the platform and the learning and other content, which is around, what's our tone of voice, what kind of brand experience do we want to provide to the end user, whether they be internal stakeholders or whether they be external people accessing an extended enterprise solution and such like. So it's really thinking, what's our house style and how do we communicate that through this platform? So kind of being joined up with our marketing communications and our learning and development strategy, where possible, whether you be in a small organisation and you're doing it within just a few people, or whether it be a large organisation with separate sort of divisions and departments covering these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do that through having standards to follow. It doesn't have to have a big cost attached. I noticed in the chat room I've pointed around costs there. The branding exercise doesn't have to be a big costly part of a learning management system and the associated assets. It's about creating templates and branding and things to follow, which can be applied as you're creating those assets, where that's possible to do. And of course, if you can work with a partner that can do all of the above, then all the better. We obviously try and be that partner with our clients. Just to show you an example here, here's a platform we have for Nikon, which is a open source based platform, and this goes out to their retailers as a way of them accessing product knowledge about their camera ranges. On the screen here, the larger image is the platform itself. That's the learning management system that sits underneath it all. So it's very websitey in nature. And down the bottom left there, that's a piece of e-learning content that you can access through this portal. And on the right, there's a separate app that's also designed following the same theme. So as you see, it all kind of follows the same branding, so it all feels like part of the same experience. And that obviously is important for a brand-conscious organisation such as Nikon. Interesting, this one, where it rolls out to their retailers, they have sub-branding as well. So someone like Curry's logo would appear in here, or John Lewis's logo as their access. They see a bit of their own branding as well, so it feels a little bit more personalised for them. Moving on to pet hate number 4. I've spent all this money on you, but you still want more. So this is about costs. And the cost of an LMS, and we thought we'd open out to our attentive audience again at this point by asking a question. You can pick more than one of the options here, but what is influencing your annual costs of running your LMS? Is it an increasing number of users? Is it because extra features are being introduced because you need them? Is it because your system or supplier is putting extra features in there which you don't need but you're having to pay for? Is it your HR and administrators' time in actually looking after the LMS? That's a cost as well to you as an organisation. Is it this fact that your supplier's been putting the prices up? And are there other things which are affecting the cost? And if there are those, perhaps you can share through the chat room what they are.
And we shouldn't be shy about costs. After all, none of this stuff comes for free. We should have an honest, open discussion about it. And I remember having conversations with people back in 1999, which of course is 15 years ago. I can't quite believe it, about LMSs. And then it was all about what the upfront cost was. But now there are so many different components to the cost of setting up, running and maintaining a system and getting support for it and everything, that there can be an awful lot of different costs involved. So very interesting to get the poll results here. I think I'm going to just wrap the poll up, but please do keep putting your comments into the text chat area. If we have a look at this, I think you'll find the results quite interesting. The biggest area of costs for 50% of the people responding are the extra features that people need. So the cost has gone into either bespoking or configuring, and then 35% going to HR and admin time. So that's a substantial chunk of the cost there going into those two things, and increasing user numbers is the other one. So we've got a vast amount of the of people choosing. Of course, there's more than one choice here possible, but those are the three big ones. Guys, what do you think about that? What's your reaction to those numbers?
Yeah, really interesting actually, and we weren't quite sure what response we'd get to this one, which is partly why we asked it. So yeah, it comes as no surprise that obviously the more people you're putting in the system, that they'll come on to license fees and other ongoing costs that can get involved, that are user numbers based that we're expected to see. In terms of extra features, yeah, that's I guess that does ring true for us to an extent, because we tend to have what we tend to do with clients is their learning management systems go through sort of phases, I suppose, where you have an initial rollout, and then after things gone into a business, then once people start getting a hold of it, they realise there's more they could do with the system, and people start throwing ideas, and once they've actually got tangibly something to use, so it's not uncommon for things to be revisited and new features to come in, so that holds true. Of course, another big area is the use of people's time in supporting the learning management system within the business. So the fact that people are picking up on that's a key one. That's almost a cost that people don't necessarily consider right off because they're thinking about the service they're procuring versus the actual internal cost themselves.
And some of the thoughts coming through in the chat area are interesting too. Ed just said indecision, which I think is wonderful. I'd love to know more about it, but if I can guess what you're saying, Ed, you're saying, look, people don't make their minds up, or at the beginning, properly plan something correctly, then very often you add an awful lot of cost to a project because people make it up as they go along, which is a terrible way to plan any project. You wouldn't build a bridge by not knowing how it's going to look at the end of it. We shouldn't do an LMS the same way. Dave said content creation. We need more to make our LMS a place people want to go for learning, not just being forced to go for compliance. But Bob Price has good news. Costs went down thanks to vendors changing pricing structure. Fantastic. Good. Any other thoughts? Picking out anything else there from the chat, Stuart and Lewis?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add that something I talk to our clients about is very much the total cost of ownership. Yeah. So there are the upfront costs for the configuration of the system, and if it's a proprietary system, the kind of the purchase of the system, but also factoring in the hosting and the support costs, the kind of phased approach that Stu talked about. So perhaps starting with a simpler solution to meet today's needs, but with an eye to the future in terms of what's around the corner. And just kind of having a kind of a mindset of what's the overall budget going to be for this project, not just in the first few months, but over the first few years, and just how we can kind of scale up the solution to meet those evolving requirements, I guess you'd say. So the costs are really important. Having a platform that's flexible, that's able to meet those future requirements and be extended to meet them is equally important. I guess what doesn't come out of the poll immediately is whether the extra features are, up front when the first purchase of the system happens and it's customized to meet requirements, or if they come down the line in the subsequent phases. And I guess it could go either way. Again, something I talk to my clients about around customization is finding a sweet spot between adapting internal processes to work with the system, and then adapting the system to work with those internal processes. And if one starts the project with a mindset that we have to customize the hell out of this system to meet our exact processes as we have them, that's gonna increase the maintenance costs downstream as we upgrade the system, as we want to put future customizations on it. So it's really important thing to think about early on is just finding that sweet spot, as I say, between taking the core system functionality and working with it as far as possible. As close as we can stay to core, the lower the future upgrade and maintenance costs are going to be.
I think that's a really good point, and I do think this too often I've seen organisations jump in wanting to do exactly what you said, exactly replicate an existing, probably suboptimal process in an LMS or indeed any other system, having to spend a lot of money bespoking it and then finding actually that the system was not quite what they wanted in the first place. And if they'd gone into it with the mindset that they can change some things as they go along about processes as well as implementation, and they can make do with a good enough solution rather than the perfect one, actually not only is it cheaper to buy, cheaper to maintain, but it's also actually easier to use often because you're not trying to do something, you're not edging towards something which is in itself almost certainly suboptimal. Now look, one point I just want to raise, we said we were going to crack through and deal with questions at the end, but Andy has raised a great question about the cloud. Any thoughts about, you two guys, Stuart and Lewis, any thoughts about how we deal with customization in the world of the cloud where customization is almost impossible? What's going to happen? Is it too early to talk about this? Do you want to talk about that later, or can you?
Well, we can certainly touch on it. It'll probably be a bit of a double act between me and Stu, but we're hearing SaaS is a term we're hearing increasingly. It's across the board really, but in the LMS world as well. So the software as a solution, and this service as a solution. And there's different kind of flavors to that. I mean, just take for us, for an example, for our hosting side of our business, we have cloud-based solution and we have dedicated solutions, and it really primarily depends on the number of users we're dealing with. Cloud is very flexible. It can be upscaled very quickly. It's very affordable, but it's still a customized solution largely, or a semi-customized system that's sitting within the cloud. I think you're absolutely right. Where you've got a completely cloud-based LMS solution, then you very much need to work, with it as it is. It's going to constrain, what you do around your business processes and kind of adapting them to the platform. Sometimes to some extent that's going to be okay, but then that can also be a frustration where it just doesn't quite work for you. This is something I would say that's very much evolving at the moment, and certainly frankly we've had customers that have had SaaS-based solutions and they haven't really worked for them. They haven't had a good learner experience in using those systems. They've sometimes been described as a bit clunky. That can be true of any system really, but particularly some of the kind of SaaS-based services.
Yeah.
So it's an area it's very interesting. It's something we're looking at as a business as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a couple of things worth pointing out in here. Is that if it's like as Lewis says, a pure SaaS-based solution, then it is what it is, and customization is less of an option, or maybe not an option at all. You can do a system of kind of creating clones, which is another way of thinking, where you might take a base system and clone it to make adjustments to that system and customizations to it, which can be a cost-effective route, but give you some more custom, more options, and then actually you can build a SaaS type payment model beyond that, although it's not truly software as a service. Software as a service, of course, you don't own the software in the same way. You're buying into using a service, and when you stop paying, you don't have access to it in the same way, versus if you're buying a system and having it implemented for you, then actually that's your system and it remains yours beyond, even if you stop paying for it effectively. So there's different models in there, but you just have to consider ultimately what works for the business, considering all of the above in terms of how you want to pay for a service as well as what you want it to do.
Let's not get bogged down in SaaS at the moment. We could spend all day talking about it, and perhaps one day we should have a webinar that really focuses on the pros and cons. Tony says there are positives to SaaS, and of course you're right. Let's not get down on SaaS. But we just want, Andy raised the point, and I thought it was a good point to drill on it. Let's carry on, and we've got other questions from Tony and others which we can pick up with later on. So, guys, back to you.
Just to summarise on costs is consider the whole cost. You've got implementation costs, unless you have a SaaS, and then that's all wrapped up in one as an ongoing cost per user. But then you have hosting support, potentially license fees, system upgrades, the time you spend looking after the system, the time your users learn to use the system themselves, and the system's complex to use, they'll waste more time trying to get to what they need to. So all those things, consider those as part of the cost. And I just floated in here a bit about open source which may be an option to consider as well, because with open source you can bring costs down quite substantially, both through the cost of implementation, but also the on costs, for instance, where an open source solution, where it doesn't have license fees per se, go to a true open source system so that you can avoid that cost per learner of the license fee. But at least if you have a subscription model or something like which you have the commercial open source, it can be kept a lot more cost effective than what you might otherwise be used to.
Yeah, that wouldn't become a barrier to growing the system basically, whereas if you've got a kind of a high cost model for increasing the user base, then that's going to be something in a way that's almost sort of holding you back. So that shouldn't, one hopes that shouldn't be a constraint to actually a wider use of the system.
Okay, well I'm going to move on. We're going to move through the next couple of points a little bit quicker because we'll run out of time otherwise. We've got a couple of client examples we could float without going into details. Both of these clients have saved in order of about £1 million on their year one implementation based on using an open source product and or being very focused about how they drive learning to individuals through use of audiences and targeting them on the learning that they need to do at the time they need to do it, and therefore being able to cut back on things like face-to-face training costs. Moving on to number 5, pet hate. You never do anything that I want to do. Why are you so inflexible? We've already touched on this actually in the last conversation, but the point we're getting across here is that you have the needs you have as an organisation, but your LMS may not be able to service those needs. So for instance, on the SaaS point, it may not be able to be customised to do the things you want to do that it doesn't do already. If there are things that you need to specifically do, then obviously you need to get a system that services those needs. And that's important when choosing the system, because the flexibility of the system is dictated by the system itself and its ability to be configured and customised. And one point on that actually, you'll hear these terms of configuration and customisation. Just to clarify those, configuration, we're talking about taking the system and what it can do and configuring the options for that system to work the way a particular organisation wants to. So it's using the system as is, but choosing options to get it working in a specific way, versus customization, which is actually saying, you know what, we need our LMS to do X, but it doesn't, the system itself can't do that, in which case there's an additional fee to make the system do that, to customize it, if indeed that's an option. Some things to consider around this point is it an option to do a customization or not, and B, what's the cost impact of that? So there's a cost involved in creating a customization, but there's also costs involved in maintaining it. So for instance, when you come to upgrade the system, if you never customise the system, the upgrade process will be more straightforward, because if you've made any customisations, those customisations in their own right will have to be separately upgraded to still be in line with the new system, the new upgrade of the system. So that's an on-cost to watch out for, and therefore one should ask themselves is, do I really need that customisation? Is that something that's really important to do, versus actually we can kind of live with it, or we can change our business process to work with what's there already. But certainly the key thing to remember is that you have the needs you have, and identifying those needs and choosing a vendor carefully that can service those needs is an important part of the LMS procurement exercise in the ongoing relationship.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is flexibility, and it does sort of relate to the conversation we were just having around SaaS, which is, SaaS can be a bit inflexible. Your needs will change over time, so you really need a solution that has that flexibility to meet those evolving requirements, to be able to customize and tweak the system, whether that be through configuration, where to some extent SaaS can help, or whether it be through customization, where you really need your own solution that's going to be specific to you and your business's needs, rather than a more of a generic kind of solution. So yeah, adapting it over time and having that flexibility is really, really important, and identifying a solution early in the process that's going to meet those evolving requirements.
Someone picked up on the open source point in the chat area. Open source is very flexible by its nature, so that's another argument to say open source. Do consider the open source route, because there's loads of flexibility there in terms of what one can do, but also do consider the cost impact. Moving on to number 6, pet hate. You promised me you'd stay with me. Why you no call anymore? This point is about the support that you get for your system beyond that initial implementation, and I would say that in our experience, this is in the LMS world, this is probably the number one sore point that we see when we join other webinars that more broadly look at LMSs, or we talk to clients and other providers. And the like, is about the fact that the implementation was fine, we bought the thing that we wanted, we got it in, but actually what then happened maybe wasn't the service that we expected to get from our partner. We were left a bit high and dry, or we didn't get turnarounds on support issues we might have, or we didn't have someone who could work with us to help us get the most out of the system. Lewis when we were talking this through, made a great point around the fact that launching your learning management system into the business is the beginning of a journey. In part, it's not the end of it. Okay, yes, we've gone through a project process of putting a learning management system in, but then there's years of LMS in front of you, which needs to be looked after and run and loved as a product and a service around that.
Absolutely, and just again to add what Stu's saying, really the end game, the solution here is around having a great product. Well, of course, that's what we're talking about here today, but it's also having a great partner that's going to help you evolve that solution over time, to feed into kind of sharing your vision and helping you with your roadmap over time, to scaling as the solution scales and perhaps goes out to other countries, to other markets, to other audiences. So really having somebody that is your learning technology partner, it's a really important point, and again it makes it really important to choose the right partner to begin with where possible. So don't just think the short term, let's get a solution up and running, but think longer term. I know this is kind of obvious, but it's kind of just worth saying. I think it's worth sort of re-emphasising. So think for the long term, not just for the short term sort of project. And as Stu just made the point, that really the launch is the very beginning of that journey. It's the end of the initial procurement project, but it's the beginning of delivering learning ongoing to your customers, to your internal customers.
Yeah. So you basically need you want to really find a supplier that can give you the confidence that they're going to be that person that can help support you through that journey. And considering all of the above, as you can see on the slide, the different things that one should be considering.
Yeah, and I should have said as well, apart from a great product and a great partner, you need great hosting and support. So, that's another kind of key ingredient. And again, training. So, you've got the system up and running, but you need to be trained how to use it. So you need a partner that's going to be able to deliver that training to you. So these are the kind of the key, the ingredients of the recipe, really, to have a successful project.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to move on to the next point. Number 7, pet hate. I just can't take you anywhere. So this is a point that we want to draw upon. The technology world has changed. Clients now or users of LMS want to be able to access them on all the devices that they are used to using, and of course with the advent of smartphones and tablets, the massive surge of use of those devices fast catching up and taking over the PCs of this world. They're really finding their way into the workplace. So we thought we'd ask a question here about the kind of devices that you think within your business that you would want your LMS to roll out on. And you can pick more than one option here. If there are other devices we haven't mentioned there, then of course via the chat room, please let us know what they are.
Lots of responses to this. I'm not sure quite what we're going to learn. Let's see if we've got any in the other ones. Let's have those in the text chat area. Let me just put up the results of the poll, which are that pretty much we want it to work across everything.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not surprising to you guys.
No, that was kind of the answer we were expecting. We really just wanted to, I suppose, set the scene to get people, recognising the fact that all those devices are now becoming important to us, and therefore when we're looking at future-proofing a learning management system, we need to consider that as part of the exercise. Moving on just to our next slide around this, Tom, I don't know if you could just maybe leave the poll up, that's fine. Is that it's important to consider the mobile delivery. I suppose at Kineo, Sitting Guilds Kineo, we don't think of it as mobile. We more think about it as multi-device, really. Mobile is, an arguable term, laptops, mobile, etc. So we just think of it as multiple device and designing systems that work across all of those devices. So, you need to think about for the learning management system, but also the content as well. So if you're designing e-learning, does that need to be multi-device? We've got situations where clients have, multi-device e-learning, but not multi-device LMSs, so which kind of semi-defeats the object depending on how you're rolling out that e-learning. But it's a thing to consider. And another point just to think of in here as well is, does it need to work across all those devices? So you might think, yes, we potentially want to future-proof things, but when it comes to the smartphone, for instance, is it important that the learning management system works on the smartphone or not? Or do we just want to be able to access the content on the smartphone and that feedback somehow to the LMS? Because the cost of implementing the LMS across multiple devices may be different, and therefore there can be a cost impact there. So also do focus on what your actual needs are, as well as what your anticipated needs might be.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be many webinars around this specific subject, but this is a changing landscape. The way that people access learning and access content more generally is changing, as we know. So in that learner journey, which is the context we're looking at today, there are those gaps between kind of events. You're at work, you're at home, you're going to a meeting, but there are those places in between, there's spaces in between, and that's where the kind of mobile device is key. So the smartphone is key. Perhaps somebody's going to a meeting and it's going to be a difficult meeting, or they might want to access some top tips in having difficult conversations, in having challenging meetings. So on their smartphone, on the bus or on the train, they want to get access to that content, not the whole piece of e-learning, not the kind of full interactive experience, but just some key assets that are going to equip them for the situation they're going into. So, our experiences are changing. Perhaps we wouldn't have even perceived the need to access LinkedIn or Facebook on a phone, but as soon as we can, we do. It becomes, part of what we do and part of our lives. And that's exactly the same is going to happen around learning. So even though it's kind of relatively early days in terms of accessing it via the smartphone, it's something that is sort of bound to become part of what we do as part of our everyday experience.
Sure. And just to show an example here, we recently launched Totara Mobile, which was our tablet and smartphone sort of instance of Totara, which looks at the same master learning management system, but what we did was we tried to focus down on, if I am using the learning management system on a smartphone, for instance, do I still need to do all the things I'd normally do in an LMS? And arguably there's certain things you wouldn't necessarily need to do, like all the administration functions or the sort of reporting and the like. So what we did, we kind of made the interface simpler and honed down really on the things you needed to be able to do as a learner or manager or etc., so that I can access my learning, I can see my learning plans, I can see that I've got a face-to-face training session coming up, but I might not need to do all the things that I would do in a larger screen interface. So that's part of our thinking here. Someone asked a question about offline access to content. Yeah, absolutely. That's on our case, we haven't enabled that. It's on the roadmap, so it's coming in. It will be coming in the next release. Is the ability to sort of download content into your mobile device, your tablet, smartphone, to be able to use that independent of the LMS, and then when you're back online, have your data tracked back up. Much easier said than done. But yeah, it's an important consideration.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd say is that in the business world, we talk about LMSs, about learning management systems, and in academia, they talk about virtual learning environments. So for me, when I think smartphone, I'm very much thinking that learning environment. That's the kind of, the terminology that I use. It's about how I access learning, what's the environment through which I access that learning. And as Stu says, it's something that we're putting a big old focus on to make sure that we can deliver that to the learner in an optimized way. So not trying to replicate the whole product, the whole platform, but optimizing it and reskinning it to that environment and to that situation.
Okay, I'm going to move on. We've just got a few more points to cover in this presentation, and that's just an example of some content on the learning wise that's rolled across multiple platforms that we've done. So we've got just a few more points to cover in the next 5 minutes or so to give us some time for some questions. So we'll go through these a little quickly, but hopefully we can cover everything. So number 8, pets hate. You don't like any of my friends, or do you just sit there on your own? Integration is important in the learning management system world. Some suppliers will provide systems which do everything, for instance the SAPs of this world. So they have an LMS and they have an HR system and they'll have other systems which will all nicely talk to each other. And don't feel that you've got to be tied to doing that if you have multiple systems within your business. It's entirely fine to buy multiple different systems which are focused on their own key strengths and the right ones for you, and then get these things talking to each other. Open source is very, very good for this because the nature of open source means that systems are able to talk to each other easily, and we can build interfaces between them. But we've pulled out a few examples here, the kind of things that we, with our clients, typically see being interfaced with each other. So we have HR or payroll systems as ways that hold lots of user information which is needed within the learning management system to set up different roles and relationships between line managers and end users and the like. We have data warehouses which might be used to capture sensory data for reporting purposes. So we may be taking learning data from the learning management system, say who's done what and when and etc., how compliant people are, and then feeding that back into a data warehouse to essentially report versus, obviously you can do that direct in the learning management system too. We have situations where people take data into CRM systems. So for instance, an example we're going to look at in a minute, for Sony, they integrate with their CRM so that they can see what end users are accessing in terms of product knowledge, and they can use that to steer what training they provide and indeed which products are popular and things like that.
Yeah, well, exactly that in the Sony example, so a customer buys a product, they're added to the CRM system, and the products they bought are mapped within CRM. That automatically triggers an account creation in the LMS, and it automatically enrolls them in the relevant learning for that product. So they get sent an enrollment email, they log in, they access immediately all the learning related to the product they purchased. Meanwhile, the system is tracking what else they're looking at. That feeds through to the data warehouse, which feeds back to CRM to trigger contact to say, are you interested in this other product that you've been looking at? Just a kind of virtuous circle, and it's all about integration, integrating those disparate systems. It's also worth saying that integration can be more sophisticated using web services for dynamic kind of bidirectional feeds, or it can be simple with a kind of an export of data that's then sucked into the other system on a nightly basis, for example. So integration doesn't have to be costly, is kind of what I'm saying. It can be quite simple, but it can empower these individual systems.
Last point on this is another key one is that actually you may have multiple learning management systems. That's not unusual for large business that have multiple portals. Data can be shared between those portals. And the thing to bear in mind here is if you're buying systems, make sure they can talk to each other or they can be made to share data through into different interfaces. The example I pulled up here is one of which we're doing a separate webinar actually on next week, which is our managed learning service, which basically provides a platform which sits over qualifications and apprenticeships and the like. And without going into any detail at all about the diagram here, if you want to find out more, come to next week's webinar that we're running, and there's a link there for it. Is that we integrate learning management system with ePortfolio, with management information system, and with funding streams, among others, to create a nice joined up system which from the front end learner manager perspective feels like one system, not multiple systems. Last 2 points to make, we're almost there. Number 9, pet hate. It's not you, it's me. I've just outgrown you. Okay, it's you after all. Is your LMS for life or a fling? The point we're trying to get across here is think about your LMS as a journey, as a roadmap in its own right. You might be buying an LMS for a tactical purpose, for a one-off use. You might be buying something that's an enterprise system, which is going to be living in the system for many years to come. Think about that journey and share that journey with your supplier when you're going through the exercise of procurement, and obviously on the project itself. And if you've got a current supplier, talk to them about the journey. Because knowing where an LMS is going and what you want to do as a business is key to understanding how the system should be designed, and if you've got the right system or not, actually, and how we're going to go on that journey together. Many systems that we've designed, and I'd say most of the big ones actually, have started life as much smaller systems and then grown into being what they are now. And I'm just going to float an example here for the cooperative, where we have a system here which started life as a leadership portal with 500 top leaders in the organisation needing to access training and materials. The Co-op's own vision was that this thing would cascade out into the business beyond that initial story, and it's been very successful for them. 94% of their leaders have recommended it onwards, and actually we've now gone through phase 2, where we've now cascaded to the next layer of leaders and managers in the organisation, where we now have several thousand people in the system, and it's anticipated that the system can then grow beyond that. Indeed, Nippon very, very briefly rolled out initially product training to one retailer. That grew to all their retailers in the UK and Ireland, then has grown to a European platform with all the retailers beyond that. So the system has grown over time and needs to be scalable. Then number 10, last pet hate we wanted to cover is, I want to see other people. Are you okay with that? This I'll cover relatively briefly, but an important point to start considering is extended enterprises. What we mean by extended enterprise is the audience we have beyond our typical internal audience. So the Nikon example we just used there, or Sony would be another, have extended enterprise whereby they're providing services out to their retailers versus their internal audience. But even if you have an internal platform, it may be that you have an extended workforce on that of people that you want to enable to access your training, and therefore there's a scalable model which needs to be considered, which might need to cope with different branding, different resellers, different regions, languages, all sorts of things. You could even have e-commerce plugging in where you're providing access to training, which is a pay for access, which we have a number of our clients where people can buy courses online. And actually that's a key thing for looking forward for your organisation. And just the example we wanted to show here was just to flash up the Sony platform here, which actually this is a public-facing platform, this Sony platform, so you could get to this and create an account and use it. And it's a Sony Professional, and they extend their enterprise out to their retailer audience, and actually they've designed a whole suite of material that goes with this. So there's branded certificates for having passed training, there's marketing campaigns that go out around what they're doing, and they're really sort of providing all the sort of tools which sit around the service as a whole as an extended platform from the business itself. And like Lewis mentioned before, that sort of ties into their CRM and other things as well. So I'm just going through quickly because I'm conscious that we've sort of got to the end of our time. What I just wanted to end up putting up is, here's the 10 points we covered really. So remember, looks matter. Think about the branding of your LMS, how it looks matters to your learners as part of the user experience. Design with all your users in mind, not just your administrators, but also your managers, and in particular that important audience, the end user, the learner. Design the whole experience, a bit like we just briefly saw there for Sony. Think about all the assets, all the content and the things which can be serviced from your LMS, and if possible, set standards to design across that whole suite. Consider your ongoing costs, just not your setup costs, and open source might be a solution in there. Choose a flexible system which can meet your business needs now and ongoing. Pick a long-term partner that can support you proactively beyond the implementation to make sure you're getting the great service ongoing in the business. Think about multiple device delivery. all the multiple platforms, tablets, smartphones, desktops, laptops that you either now or in the future may need to deliver over, and can the LMS work on them? And be able to integrate with other systems, make sure the system is able to share data with others because it's likely to need to. Think about your LMS journey, your roadmap for your system. Is it a one-off thing, or is it going to have a journey in front of it, and share that with your supplier in designing your system or looking after it ongoing? And lastly, think about, do I need to reach out beyond my business with a system that I've got, or indeed do I need a separate system to do that? So that kind of wraps things up from our side, and we've just got a final slide there with some links to useful stuff. So I'm going to hand back over to Dom.
Thank you very much, guys. I mean, plenty of ground covered there. As I suggested at the beginning, it was a full-on presentation, lots to cover, because after all, it's a big issue. We covered plenty in the Q&A as well. And very quickly, one question, but somebody wanted to know, I think it was Stuart too, or Steve too, wanted to know how many people out here have got bespoke and how many have got vanilla LMSs. I'm just going to put a poll up very quickly, which people can answer right now as we throw some questions at the guys. So here we go. On the love theme, so I'm just going to look at Andy Wooler's point here. On the love theme, I've seen many people who've jumped from one bed to another, all 4 major players over the 10 years, and these are called serial LMS purchasers. Perhaps with today's theme we could call them something else, I don't know. Perhaps they're serial lovers of LMSs, we can put it politely. Please answer the poll, it just is just a matter of interest. And now very quickly, going to throw some questions at you. We've got about 5 minutes. Let's see how many we can squeeze into those 5. Ashley said, what does everyone think about bring your own device? Okay, that's the whole webinar on itself, but I want 30 seconds from each of you, Lewis and Stuart. Bring your own device, pros, cons, what do we think about it? Steve too says, it has to be part of the future. Many people are doing it anyway, regardless of what the formal policy is. Guys, what do you think?
Yeah, agreed. People are even being incentivised to do it in some organisations, got cash incentivised to do it as well, to bring their own device, so we will see more of that. Pros, it means that you can save money on your IT if you're a business because people bring their own in. It means they'll have up-to-date kits, and it's flexible in that respect for the learner. They can use what they're used to using, and they probably have a more powerful kit than a lot of what we see in IT in business. And things we need to consider, whether or not they're cons, are the technical impact. So if we're designing for an organisation where we know what the specific IT spec is, that's important for us as a supplier to make sure the system's going to work on everything. If it can need to work on absolutely everything, then we're working to a very broad tech spec, and we need to consider that when designing learning management systems, and also when designing the content to go on those systems. So, I mean, that's not insurmountable, and of course we deal with those sorts of situations, but that would be a key one for me.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes we find that home users actually are fine because they tend to have modern browsers. It tends to be, some larger organisations with some kind of legacy, really, somewhat legacy browser systems that are more the challenge, that may be running, IE7 or even in some cases IE6. So in terms of bring your own device, I mean, it's a changing landscape, isn't it? We're seeing that now some organisations are providing the ability for their staff to buy a laptop, for example, whereby the company actually buys it for them, and then they sort of draw down the repayments over a period of time. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, because the organisation gets to choose what the end hardware is. The staff member owns it at the end of the term period. And it's kind of happy days. It's a good way of doing it, and that's something we're just starting to see. I don't know if that will grow.
I think there are so many complications about it in terms of technology and in terms of legal positions. Nonetheless, as everybody knows, it's going to happen anyway, as the song says. So we just need to find a solution around it. Okay, interesting, the results of our poll. We had, we only had a quick bit of maths, so about 40 people answering this, but of those, 4 are using it out of the box, which is very interesting, and almost half of all people are using it just out of the box or with some configuration, but still that's leaving quite a heavy number here with customizing a bit, all the extensive customization. So quite an even spread there, and I guess that's not much of a surprise. But I think this shows that the move to SaaS, or indeed the amount you're paying for ongoing maintenance, is going to get higher and higher as you make your way down that list. So there you are. You asked for the poll. That's audience response. We put the poll up. Let us move on to one more quick question. Ed in Sweden is where it's snowing at the moment, he tells us, is interested in large, small companies and LMSs, always a key issue. If you're trying to get to an LMS or you want to purchase one, should you work with another organisation and have the vendor doing everything for you really as a service, or should you try to bring it in-house and control it yourselves?
Yeah, it would depend on, I guess, the route one needed to go down as a business and how you wanted to work. I mean, both are possible. In our experience, and I mean, this may be flavoured slightly by how we tend to work, but we typically have situations where we help with the implementation and the journey to get everything right into the business, and then we host and support and help support ongoing. But the client themselves has training and plays a kind of a key role in administrating their system, so that they would be able to look after the system themselves, and they wouldn't be reliant enough to keep coming back for everything they need, which puts more control in the client's hands, so they can choose if they want to update courses or content or change a banner on the home page or create a new report or many other things they can do. All that, in our system at least with Totara, is under their control, and they like that because it gives them the flexibility to do them stuff themselves and take on that ownership, that level of ownership, and also it helps with the cost, of course, versus that all coming through to us. If someone wants to work the other way, of course, it's possible as well. You know, so if people want to be more hands-off and want the things set up and just sitting there running, and actually just wanted to fire off, we've got a new course to upload to the supplier, that's also fine. It's a different model. If it's a SaaS-based system, you're likely to have some less administrative control depending on quite what you want to be able to do. So it would depend on your requirements and how you wanted to work.
Oh, that's always the vendor answer, isn't it? It depends. Yeah. But you're right, of course. You're right. It does depend, doesn't it? It depends on the circumstances. So I've asked Andy to put his email into the text chat area, because I know that Andy's got years of experience in this area and he'll be able to help. But of course, you're right, guys. It does depend on the peculiarities and the particulars. Are you going to start small and grow? Are you trying to just manage something you've already got? How much experience do you have, and so on? There's so many variables there. So. But I just wanted to ask the question because we always believe in helping people out on these calls and trying to make sure we are sharing as much as possible. Sadly, although I have, as always, a page full of questions to ask, we have hit the buffers. It is now 1 o'clock UK time for us to stop. People are going to be rushing off to finish their lunch, grab a sandwich, or get on with the afternoon's email. I want to say thank you very much to everyone who's attended. It's been tremendously useful getting all of that input, as always. The slides, the recording, the chat will be available later on learningandskillsgroup.com. Please come along and check that out. Everyone's saying thank you very much, and we should agree, shouldn't we? Say thank you very much to Stuart Chadwick, Solutions Director, and Lewis John, Solutions Consultant at City and Guilds Kineo, because it's been a rich presentation, lots of graphics, lots of content, and portrayed in I think that light-hearted, but it's a way that will make it stick. How can we fall back in love with that LMS? Well, perhaps we've found some ways of doing it with the guys here today. Thank you very much, everyone in the audience, and guys from City and Guilds Kineo, thank you very much for such a great presentation.
Thanks, Don, and thanks everyone for attending.
All right. If you go to learningandskillsgroup.com, you'll find you'll find the dates for the next presentation, which is actually in 2 weeks' time. So I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks back on the LSG webinars. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.